Thank you, Peter, for this amazing, great, and insightful talk. Now I would like to welcome you to the ChileMass panel on clean tech. The panel will be moderated by ChileMass board member Warren Adams. Warren himself is a symbol of collaboration between Massachusetts and Chile. He's a Boston-based entrepreneur and angel investor with long history of connections with Chile. Currently, Warren works with entrepreneurs, family offices, venture funds, and nonprofit organizations on sustainability and climate change solutions. Warren is a member of the Clean Energy Venture Group and a board member of Vineyard Power, a key partner of Vineyard Wind, which is leading the way in offshore wind energy in the United States. A pioneer in the field of social networking, Warren founded Planet All, which Amazon acquired in 1998. In 2006, Warren founded Patagonia Sur, a for-profit conservation company that invested in, protected, and monetized ecologically valuable ecosystems in Chile and Patagonia. Patagonia Sur also launched several non-profit entities, including Tierra Austral, Mary, and Reforestemos Patagonia. Participating on the panel today are Claudio Seebach from Asociación Generadora de Chile, Daniel Goldman from Clean Energy Ventures, and Mark Vasu from Greentown Labs. Now I'll turn it over to Warren.
Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Ivan, for that kind introduction and for all of that the MIT Chile Club has done to make this a success for today. Very much appreciated. Good afternoon. I'm Warren Adams. I'm delighted you could all be here for ChileMass Innovation Day. I'm from Massachusetts, but Chile, and in particular Chilean Patagonia, has been my favorite place in the world since I first visited over 20 years ago. Last month, I had a wonderful visit to Chile. I went from the north in Atacama down to the far south in Tortel. And the trip really reminded me of the wonderful natural resources and renewable resources Chile has. The abundance of sun, the powerful rivers, the geothermal energy, and the persistent wind. And in the same trip in Santiago, I met with innovators in corporations and startups and government. I was really impressed with the projects and the innovations and initiatives that are happening for Chile to harness these renewable energies as well as other natural resources in a sustainable way. It's also certainly very exciting that Chile is now hosting the UN Climate Summit, COP25 in December. I think it's a wonderful way for Chile to showcase its environmental stewardship as well as its clean tech. Today, I'm thrilled to have a wonderful panel who will share their perspectives of the clean tech ecosystem as well as opportunities here in Massachusetts and in Chile. Claudio Seebach is an electrical engineer and entrepreneur. He's the executive chairman of Generadores de Chile, the business association of companies that generate over 90% of Chile's electricity. Daniel Goldman is co-founder and managing director of Clean Energy Ventures, a $100 million venture fund based here in Boston that invests in early-stage clean tech companies. Dan has 25 years of experience in the energy sector, and he founded the Clean Energy Venture Group, an investment group which has funded over 30 companies since 2005, with a track record of annualized returns over 35%. And Mark Vasu, who's the executive vice president of Greentown Labs, which is just up the street here in Somerville, Mass. If you haven't toured it yet, I highly encourage you to do that on one of your trips to Boston. Greentown is the largest incubator of clean tech startups in North America. More than 180 companies have been incubated by Greentown Labs already. Those companies have been collectively raised more than $400 million. And Mark also provides consulting and advisory services to new or growing incubators, both nationally and internationally. I'm grateful that through the efforts of ChileMass and the support of Corfu that we were able to get all three panelists together in Chile just last week. We did our homework. And I think during that trip, everyone that participated will admit that the many connections were made between government, industrial, financial, and the startup communities. And it's exciting to think about the collaboration and projects and initiatives that come from that. So let's jump right into the discussion now. First, Claudio will talk about the path for renewable energy and a carbon neutral economy in Chile. Dan will then share his thoughts on clean tech trends and capital flows. And Mark will follow with insight on the roles that entrepreneurs and incubators serve in this ecosystem. After their opening remarks, we'll have a broad-ranging discussion, and we encourage all of you to participate. Hopefully you remember how to get to that web page, and you can post your comments, and I'll see those on the iPad, and we'll choose some of the questions from the audience. Claudio?
Thank you, Warren. I have a presentation, so I might get up, but it's really hard for several reasons to be here in front of you. First of all, for your brilliant presentation of Peter, for the invitation. It's actually my first time in Boston. I studied on the other side. First at UC Berkeley, just because it was close to Yosemite to get climbing there. And then to Stanford, because back then my wife said, you choose university, I choose a state. And she wanted sun. And she was right. I mean, weather here is not like in California. So, well, as Warren said, I'm the chairman of the Association of Electricity Generators. So, where's the, here. So it probably, even though Peter gave away many insights, which is very useful, I'll speak on that. I'll speak about electricity, and I'll speak on the link of electricity and climate change. That's why I thought of thinking, what's the link between climate change, energy, and electricity? But I'd like to start with something completely different, which is closely related, of course, to energy. And it's probably the most pressing environmental hazard problem we have in Chile, which any one of you, but I hear most of you, or at least half of you are Chilean, so you're pretty familiar with this view of Santiago. But this is not just fog, this is pollution. And air pollution, that fine particulate matter that goes into the bloodstream, in Chile is, according to the Ministry of Environment, is 4,000 deaths, premature deaths a year. That's double the amount of people that die from car accidents. And Warren, I came all the way to Boston to meet Warren, even though I knew that we both are absolutely lovers of Patagonia for a long time. Warren knows well Patagonia, and probably any of you who's been to Patagonia think of Patagonia as a pristine place, wonderful skies, beautiful weather, not beautiful weather, but amazing weather, and you don't think of Coyhaique, the capital of Aysén, as being the most polluted city in Latin America. And the question, where does that come from? And the fact is that still 25% of Chilean energy is biomass, is wood, is damp, humid wood. And the burning of that produces 86% of our pollution. Well, of course, we have the Andes. Many cities and towns are located in valleys. But in fact, the fact that we still burn wood is a reflection from something different. It's an issue of energy inequality. Most of the Chilean homes, particularly down south of Santiago, still use wood to heat or to have hot water. In fact, poor people spend more than 2.5 times the amount of that wealthier people spend of their income for cooking and heating, mainly because of the low energy efficiency of wood burning, and also because their homes are usually badly insulated. In fact, talking about insulation, poor people tend to live in winter 4.5 degrees Celsius. I translated, it's 8 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's always hard. Below the comfort temperature. Think of what that means for babies, for the elderly. So that's an issue which is pressing. That's happening today. Pollution, energy inequality. But if you look at the broader picture on energy, and we're here for thinking of clean tech, I'd like to remind you a little bit where we're staying globally in energy. 2003, The Economist, for me, the best magazine there is, said it's the end of the oil age. 15 years later, cover of February this year, it's a crude awakening. It's not true. ExxonMobil just said it will increase the investment in oil in 25% in the next 5 years. Oil. And of course, let's think on how that is linked to climate change. And then if you go to the same source, we speak a lot about renewables, we see it a lot about wonderful clean technology, but that's the truth. Most of what we consume in the world, and same in Chile, is oil. Second is coal. Third is natural gas. And then comes the first world source of renewable energy, which is hydropower. Same in Chile, hydropower is the largest source of renewable energy, but it's tiny compared to that 70% of imported fossil fuels we use in Chile as a whole. So the question is what that means. It's not only a problem we use in the pollution, but it's the fact that almost 60% of the final energy we use in Chile is derived from there. It's diesels, kerosene, it's gasoline. And if you're familiar with Santiago, that's the buses. I'm usually a biker. Santiago weather is better than in here. And I never know if I'm gonna die before because I'm gonna be run over by a bus, or it's because of the pollution of the buses, or in general of public transport, or transport in general. So, and Peter already showed this graph in a much better way. If we go and keep on going, emitting at the rate we're doing it right now, we're probably hitting anywhere between 5, 6 or so degrees above the current temperature by the end of the century. We need to, at some point, reverse that direction. And for that, to be at least within the boundary, we need at some point to become carbon negative. And that means hitting carbon neutrality at some point. So every time I work in electricity, I'm an electrical engineer by training, but everyone speaks about energy and confuses it with electricity, thinks of electricity. But the fact is that electricity generation today, of course, it's true. There's almost 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, but second comes transport, industry. In total energy, and 40% of that energy production of greenhouse gas emissions come from oil derivatives. So I'd like to focus on what we can do with electricity and where electricity is going in Chile, and how this is a chance for climate change. So first of all, we're all absolutely dependent on electricity. Usually people can't believe that figure. I've done a survey every time, and informed groups of people, they should bet how much of their daily consumption of energy is electricity. Most people think it's 60%. Worldwide, it's 21, Chile is 22%, and it's probably the US is not more than that. Electricity is not our main use of energy, but we're all absolutely dependent on electricity. But the good news is that within that electricity, Chile has quite a portion of renewable energy because we're very rich in renewables, and Peter showed us a little bit of that. In fact, last year, 2018, it was 45% of our electricity, mostly hydropower. We have mountains, we have rain, less and less due to climate change, but we do have rain, we have dams. But we have been blessed not only by renewables, but also by innovation and by the revolution of the new clean technologies. And that made last year to be Chile named as the #1 country by Bloomberg New Energy Finance to invest in renewables. Why? Well, because we have a lot of renewables, but because we are also an open economy, we are still a growing economy, we have long-term regulation, and that has made us that at some point, even this year, well now, last year, 100% of almost 2 gigawatts under construction in Chile were renewable energy. Hydropower, a lot of solar, some wind, and we have no subsidies in Chile for that. That's been done purely business. This is business driven. And we recently released a study that we wanted to have trajectories of renewable energy. And the fact is that our projections say that from the current 45%, we're going to hit 75% of renewables by 2030. And from that 75%, 30% will come from the sun. For the first time ever, sun will be the #1 source of electricity in Chile, surpassing hydropower and surpassing thermal power. That doesn't mean that hydropower and even thermal aren't relevant. In fact, you can see this called energy transition coming from the 90s, where Chile was mainly renewable and hydropower, going down and down and down because the amount of growth of Chile needed new power sources. New power sources came from gas, came from coal, which were faster to implement. But at some points, we have this reverse, and we're going into the other direction. And as you see, it's 30% coming from the sun. So the thing is, we still, on one of the big issues, will be how we can balance that sun, which of course Chile is long and north-south, balanced sun, which an old country comes up at the same time of the year and goes away, and there is no sunlight at night. So that's going to be, but there is another issue we've also been looking at. Coal, which still feeds 40% of our electric generation, just last year, we agreed with government, we, that means the 4 companies out of the 13 member companies, that there will be no new coal. And the no new coal means also what will we be done during the next decades with the existing coal. Today, coal is the one that gives us safety in our system, makes the system reliable. But of course, if you look at those graphs, at some point in the future, coal, and if we think of climate change, can't be there. And the fact is, and this is my last thought I want to share with you, is that electricity is the only energy product that is going every day less and less CO2 emitting. People think of electricity as something that has CO2 per se, but the more renewables we have, the less CO2 we'll have. And of course, you cannot take CO2 out of diesel or of natural gas. It's embedded in the structure, chemical structure. So what can we do with electricity? And what we're doing? Well, think of those uses that are more intense in electricity: public transport, logistics, taxis, heat pumps. I think back to the question on the pollution question. Today, we use stoves. In public transport, Santiago became the city, the #1 city apart out of China, that has the more electric buses. And this is not because the companies behind this are just so nice and they want to waste their money. This is business. It makes more sense today to invest in electric buses to renew the fleet. And that brings energy efficiency. Combustion engines are extremely efficient in transforming fuels into heat. And they create a little bit of movement, but most of it goes away in heat. And they create they create pollution, and this will have a health effect. And of course, greenhouse gas emission reduction. So if you look at the effect of, well, it's slightly moved, but a wood stove is highly inefficient. It's 20 to 60% goes only into heat. Most of it gets burned away. And the electric heat pumps, it's a pity that it just didn't show up well, but electric heat pumps have the magic of transforming 1 unit of electricity into 3 to 4 units of heat. And that's just by the virtue of the transformation. So the future should be trying to use non-emitting sources like electricity, and it will be the central part of reducing CO2 emissions and local pollution. And again, what I wanted to share with you is that I hope if you go to Santiago, this is the picture you get of Santiago, and not the one I started with. And it should be this way every day. And Chile, if we think of COP25, should become, or can become, a country that can show the path for being a pioneer country to become carbon neutral by 2050 by the using of renewable energy, but replacing all that fossil fuels by electricity, which comes from renewables. That transition can be Chile an example. And as that Washington Post said, we should be the solar Saudi Arabia. While President Trump promotes coal, Chile and others are turning to cheap sun power. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. I feel honored to be invited to this first ChileMass conference. I was really fortunate also to have Warren and Fernanda and ChileMass invite me to Chile last week with Mark. We had a fantastic trip, learned an incredible amount, like drinking from a fire hose in 4 days. But I want to share some of those observations, but first tell you a little bit about what we do at Clean Energy Ventures and a little bit of the history of the group. If this works. Here we go. So as Warren mentioned, we're a $100 million fund investing in early stage clean energy technologies. But let me give you a little bit of history. So we started in 2004 as 4 of us sitting around a table at Henrietta's table in Charles Hotel in Harvard Square, thinking about how to invest in each other's companies. And from that, we sort of figured if we wanted to create a group and we invested in each other's companies and we went off and ran those companies, it probably wasn't going to be a very sustainable group or have much impact on sustainability. So eventually we started looking at new technologies that were emerging from MIT, from a few incubators that were around at that time, and in garages, basically. And we started making really small investments in these companies. And we started mentoring and helping the leadership teams to figure out how to go to market, how to file IP, how to raise additional capital, because we certainly weren't going to be all of their capital, and basically launch their businesses. And from that, what happened was we had four, we grew the group because people came to us like Warren and basically said, look, I want to be part of this group. I have energy or environmental experience. I've started my own company. I've served on boards. So I would like to help these companies. And I care deeply about climate change. And so from those early beginnings to today, we grew the group from 4 of us to 30 partners in Clean Energy Venture Group. And we've invested in about 40 companies over that time, including 4 companies in the fund now. And we've deployed not very much capital. Between our 30 of us plus some family offices that have co-invested with us, we've deployed about $20 million. But the companies we've invested in, the 40 companies, have gone on and raised more than $500 million. So what we've aimed to do, and I think what we've achieved over this 10-plus year period, is really to catalyze new technologies and get them into the market so that growth capital can then fund them. And so when we look at our mission, as we invest, we want to fill this early stage market. We want to fill the gap in funding early stage technologies. And ultimately, our goal is to mitigate climate change. And of course, we want to have scalable, profitable companies. And that's not at all out of sync with addressing climate change, because you really can't address climate change unless you take companies, you scale them up, that become revenue producing, and they become profitable, and get their products and services in the market. It's the only way to address climate change. So we have investors that come to us and say, well, are you a philanthropic fund? No, we want our companies to be profitable. We want to sell our companies. We want them to be acquired and their products and services to get in the market. And our strategy, or a big part of our strategy, is leveraging, within the fund, leveraging our clean energy venture partners. And Warren is, of course, one of them. We have these 30 really experienced staff who not only help us with identifying companies, doing diligence to see whether they're viable, and then serving on the boards to help the companies grow. And that's a really, really important part of our strategy as we go forward. So this is the pathway. We started with Clean Energy Venture Group over 10 years ago, 2005. In 2014, we started managing third-party money and special purpose vehicles, basically to allow some family offices to co-invest with us. And then in 2017, as the opportunity in the market really grew, we didn't have enough capital around the table. And so we went out and we raised a dedicated, more traditional clean energy venture fund. We never really sought out to raise a venture fund, but it seemed like if we were going to have impact, not only in the United States and Canada, which is our investment focus, but around the world, as our technologies are launched in other countries, we needed to raise more capital. This is a little bit of a snapshot of our portfolio. We invest very broadly across the sector. So we have things from software and web platforms like WeSpire, which is all about helping large companies be more sustainable, to things like leading edge crystal technologies, which is a monocrystalline solar wafer technology spun out of Applied Materials. Really, really interesting technology, 60% lower cost solar wafer. So really game-changing technology. So we mentor and monitor these companies. We like to be very hands-on with all the companies we invest in. And then the other part of our role is, having been here really at the beginning of the creation of the clean energy ecosystem in Massachusetts, we work very closely with folks like Greentown Labs, like with Mark and his colleagues. We work with other incubators and accelerators around the country. One of my colleagues is currently at Mars in Toronto, scouting opportunities there. And we support the integration of good policy, finance, which is sort of what we provide, and market development. And you need those 3 elements to really create a strong ecosystem around clean energy. And that's something I think we've done a really good job at in Massachusetts and a few other states. And it's something we'd love to see happen in Chile as well. I want to give one example of a company that we invested in where I think there's a lot of sort of interesting dynamics in other countries like Chile. But before I do that, maybe I'll talk for a few minutes about how we see the capital markets developing in clean energy. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the roles we fill is that early stage gap for capital. There are not a lot of funds investing at the early stage. It's a very hard thing to do. You need a lot of expertise, and you need a lot of people to mentor and manage the companies. Where there is a lot of capital flowing into the sector is at the growth stage. So when we invest in early stage companies, as long as we can get them to some critical milestones, the next round of funding is usually pretty easy. There's a massive number of strategics entering the sector, oil companies like Shell, Chevron, Total. You have chemical companies like BASF, Dow Chemical. You have materials companies like Seebach, Saudi Basic Industries. You have services and sort of OEMs like Emerson Electric, which we've co-invested with. So there are a lot of strategic investors entering this market. And they're not only entering this market for growth capital, they're actually acquiring the companies as well. We sold one company last fall, which was in the microinverter space, to Wada Semiconductor in China. We sold a company a few weeks ago to a controls technology company called Middleborough. The company that was acquired was called Powerhouse Dynamics. So there's a lot of M&A activity. Shell has purchased 2 companies in the last 2 months. So we're seeing much more activity around that, and that's really good for the sector. So the other thing I'll mention is sort of some of the areas of this sector that we like best and I think have good applicability for Chile. So one is energy storage. Obviously, it's getting a lot of attention. It's a critical element. If Claudio's scenario of the future comes true, where we have a significant amount of renewables like wind and solar coming into the market, intermittent power sources that are going to need to be firmed up by something, and that something has to be energy storage, whether it's geologic storage or battery storage using some electrochemical technology, but rather than using coal or other thermal sources. The other area we really like is material science. We've invested in a company producing carbon fiber composite materials. And this is really important for the transportation sector because we ultimately need to lightweight and make more efficient airplanes, automotive sector. And the only way we can do that is using new materials, whether it's thermoplastics or carbon fiber composite materials, which are much lighter, much stronger, and also conductive materials. So that's an area we've spent a lot of time looking at. One other area is mobility, and that includes things like micro-mobility around bike share programs, but also vehicle charging infrastructure, new ways to manage fleet vehicles, new road management and traffic control technologies. All of these things we think can have a material impact on climate change, and so they're a really big focus for us. And then I'll talk a little bit about Line Vision. So Line Vision is a company that was spun out of a local company here called Genscape. And what they've done is taken LiDAR technology, really developed for autonomous vehicles, and used it to monitor transmission lines. So you have LiDAR technology looking at the path of the line, and you have thermosensing technology looking at temperature and ambient conditions. And those combined things allow you to assess transmission line health. And if you look at what happened in California with the fires that PG&E experienced, this is a critical technology for avoiding catastrophic failures like that. But it's also has a huge impact on the ability to understand your dynamic line rating in real time. So what they can do is basically assess the pathway of the line and determine how much power you can actually move across that line. And what's been happening in a lot of countries, and particularly in a lot of regions of the US, is transmission companies, being very conservative, as they should be, are underutilizing transmission lines. And so you have places like ERCOT and SPP, regions of Texas and Oklahoma, that have huge wind resources that are not getting to market because they're not utilizing all of the transmission capacity. And so this is a way to actually monitor segment by segment of that transmission line and be able to push more renewables onto the market. I think it's a critical technology. They have a lot of discussions going on. When I was in Chile last week, I was really happy to be able to introduce them to Transelect. So I had a really interesting conversation with Transelect, and we'll see if that technology can be adopted for Chile as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Mark and look forward to questions.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. Mark Vasu, Executive Vice President of Greentown Labs. It's a real privilege also to be here today. I wanted to especially thank Yuli and Fernanda and so many on the ChileMass team that made our week stay amazing. I think we met 80 people, 18 meetings, 6 or 8 startups over the course of the time. And I think Startup Chile is in the house here as well. And I'm excited to share some of those reflections and things as well. But I thought maybe what I could do too is start with just a little bit of an overview of Greentown Labs and who we are and what we do, and then leave time at the end. I think this group is the last one before the break. Is that no, or is there? I'm not sure, but I'm probably the lagging speaker here. So stay with me, and appreciate the opportunity. Just before I start, two words that just continuously come up here, which I think just speaks to the quality and the strength of the work that we're doing that Chile and Massachusetts are doing, our collaboration and innovation. So I also think it's super genius on the part of ChileMass to organize its first Innovation Day with the theme of clean energy. So Greentown Labs, we are the largest incubator in the United States and now in North America. And our mission really is, we look at ourselves as a community of entrepreneurs that are working to try to solve the biggest energy efficiency, environmental and energy challenges in the world by providing both the physical space, the resources, the labs, and networks and programs for them to commercialize and accelerate. We are started by entrepreneurs and we are for entrepreneurs. So humble beginnings, we started by accident. We're kind of a bit of a spin out of where you stand here at MIT. There are 4 startups that were finishing up their work, doing different things in energy. And we're going to lose access to the labs and be able to work on their prototypes. So they found each other on social media, banded together, and squatted in a warehouse about not too far from here for about 6 months, and that allowed them to continue to work on their prototypes and inventions. They were working in energy efficiency, energy generation, building management, a few different areas, and you see the picture of them back in 2011. Fast forward, I mean, I guess instantly that 6 months of kind of toiling together made them recognize that there was a sense of community of these companies that were sharing and helping each other, whether it be an engineering problem, financial projections, or just splitting rent to make it more affordable. When someone ran out of money, they would hire their intern for a period of time. We spent 2 years down in Boston, and then with the help of the mayor of Somerville, moved to Somerville into a new location. It was an idle manufacturing facility. Filled that up quite quickly, and that's when, again, by accident, we learned we were the largest Cleantech incubator in the country by meeting others through a network that we're part of, as well, a national network called Incubate Energy. And because the application flow and the organic growth and the demand kept continuing with so many interesting entrepreneurs working on different things, you sometimes think there can't be another way to kind of approach the solar supply chain, and yet something else comes up, that we decided to double down again and expand into what we call our Global Center for Clean Tech Innovation about a year ago. We're proud to share it. Anybody coming to the Innovation Day tour tomorrow to Greentown Labs? If you are, raise your hand. A few folks? Awesome. So we'll get to see you again and give you a little bit of a tour of the labs. But now today, we are able to host, we have now 90 startups, 90 member companies that are part of our really 3-building complex. We kept the original building and have one up down the street. More than 450 jobs, and there's not a lot of, it's a Somerville's quite a dense space, so there's a lot of triple deckers and stuff. So we got a lot of parking, but it's mostly for bikes. We do have solar on the roof, and we have now a wet lab as well, which allows for bench level green chemistry work in advanced materials, battery materials, water membranes, and filtration kinds of work as well. So here's where we are. We're kind of in the triangle of innovation in some respects, kind of right there in the center in Union Square, Somerville. We're a mile from Harvard Square, where we have a partnership. We're about a mile plus from Tufts University, where we have a partnership, a fellow that's been working with me for the past year and a half in building our international partnerships and making new and meaningful connections with startups that are coming out of the labs at Tufts University. And then obviously MIT, where we were sort of birthed, if you will, and continue to work really actively with so many different threads and streams of what's happening in terms of innovation at MIT, which is really ground zero for so much of this work. In terms of our ecosystem and how we kind of think about it, it's not always linear, but often universities are a place where the ideas can be born and through research. Contests like the MIT Clean Energy Prize and others allow for that vetting and validation to happen a little bit. Accelerators are often that space where you can spend a concentrated amount of time with your team, getting some seed funding, validating your plan, maybe working toward a minimum viable product, and then it's a great time to come to Greentown Lab. So we're the beneficiary of Mass Challenge, which was mentioned earlier, and other Cleantech Open and other types of organizations which serves as awesome feeders for our companies, because we're really at the stage where they've got some seed funding, working toward their Series A, earning and working toward getting their first commercial customers and really refining their prototypes. And then we hope they kick themselves out and graduate and then scale their businesses. And that's what's been happening as well. Proud to be part of and help grow the Boston ecosystem, which does focus on, has a very strong theme and focus on clean technology. I think the big point, and I'll share this as we kind of talk in the discussion, that multiple stakeholders thinking similarly, working and collaborating together is what really drives innovation. And I saw that in Chile in spades, just the purposefulness of the work. And I think that's something that we pride ourselves on here in doing pretty well. And combination of NGOs, a policy supportive government, obviously the higher education community, which is quite strong here, and then a bunch of other types of organizations that surround the ecosystem and can really help support startups as well. We're here, this is an eye chart, so don't worry about reading, but the big theme is clean energy. We define quite broadly, and for the companies that are at Greentown Labs, there are ties to the circular economy, as referenced earlier, energy generation, energy efficiency, but waste, water, ag, there are lots of different ways to slice this, but we think about resource efficiency and trying to do more with less as the primary theme. You'll see at the bottom, corporate members. We do have a select number of our corporate partners as well who take space and are in the labs and in some cases set up their space so they can collaborate with startups as well. Our startups get more than $250,000 in resources, ranging from free software, professional services, and then access to our networks, participation in programs that we run all the time. We're event junkies in many respects, but also in terms of the physical space, there's a machine shop, electronics lab, a materials library that's actually was set up by Saint-Gobain, one of our leading corporate partners, and other resources as well. Our impact is 86% of our companies that have been through Greentown Labs are in business, are still growing, and we're proud of that. And Warren mentioned some of the top line stats. So the validation of having a company. One of our alumni companies earn a $35 million Series C is gives you kind of excitement that you're on the right track and you're supporting the right types of companies as well. Mentioned corporate partners. It's a big part of our source. We don't take equity in our companies, and our primary business model is rent-based. The companies just renting only as much desk and lab space and wet lab space as they need. And the other big source is corporate partners, and these are companies that we worked really hard to engage, create mutual value with. In some respects, they're almost an equal customer because, as Dan was referencing, a lot of desire for corporate strategics to work on innovation. They've set up ways and mechanisms for doing that, but they also need help. So when you can create a match-making opportunity there, that is really where a lot of the value can be returned. And you'll see whether it be NL or NG or EDF, we share corporate partners as well. So I think there's opportunities around collaboration there as well. And this is just a shot of the arrival space as well. The building is 100 years old. It was retrofitted. Its most recent 2 decades, it was an auto body repair and paint shop, kind of run down, not a place you wanted to walk past at night. There weren't really a lot of lights or windows. But now it's a very vibrant part of the heart of Union Square, Somerville, which is very much the center of the town. And this is where we stage a lot of events and try to gather the ecosystem as thought leaders, as well. So I'm excited to move into the discussion part, but the startup ecosystem there that I experience is robust. I think the desire that I witnessed to tackle some of these big problems and to involve all the different stakeholders that we do around here to try to achieve them, and the purposefulness of the work was super evident, and I look forward to sharing more about that as well.
We have about 15 minutes for questions and answers, and I thought maybe if Peter wanted to come back down and join the group since he didn't have an opportunity for questions, that would be great. And the audience, please raise your hand if you have a question. I'll start with maybe just a first one, and any of you can jump in, which is, there's a lot of talk about businesses can do it on its own. We're not using subsidies anymore. But what is the role of government, of city governments? I know Somerville's been very involved, state governments and federal governments in helping move clean tech forward.
I could start maybe briefly. I mean, particularly around here, cities and states and in the United States, that's where a lot of stuff, where really the action is, not as much at the federal level. So when you have a mayor who gets excited about it, has themes and identifies its city as an innovation city, and then helps to bring entrepreneurs and innovators into that community to make it stronger and make the economy and obviously the jobs creation happen more, is great payoff, and helps us quite a bit. At the state level, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center here, quasi-public agency, is an awesome amplifier, investor, supporter, and builder of the clean tech sector. And when you can get those kinds of entities and then supportive policies on top of that, a lot more can happen and get done. And that was part of what I was witnessing in Chile as well, that there were many big efforts. A shout out to Corfo and how awesome its innovation work is in so many kind of different sectors, but particularly in clean energy and sustainability. Helping stand up Startup Chile, helping now launch this Cleantech Institute, and I understand is quite sizable at $200 million, are really great ways to sort of create the market signals and then to drive the private sector or in partnership with the private sector to really to drive progress.
Yeah, I would just add a couple things. I think government needs to set clear long-term policy. That doesn't necessarily mean subsidies or incentives, but we need policy that sets, what kind of objectives we have for renewable penetration, maybe carbon pricing. So really to value externalities or price externalities in the market so that, we're all clear on where we're heading. And I think certainly some states have done that very well, like Massachusetts and California. But nationally, of course, the U.S. has not been as proactive on that. The other area that government needs to fill is sort of where the private sector won't take the risk. And so the one area that the federal government has done a good job with is ARPA-E, which is really the early stage funding, grant funding of new technologies. And so the Department of Energy in the US goes through very comprehensive road mapping to figure out what areas of clean energy are most critical. And based on that, they'll then run ARPA-E programs around those technology areas and fund early stage companies. And that's a way to jumpstart technologies, whether it's in storage or methane leak detection or whatever. And then the private sector can step in when some of those technologies reach a stage when the risk is more tolerant for the market.
Maybe I'd like to add something. If you step back a little bit, think of Latin America. In my perspective, role of government, among other things, to have innovation, to have energy, is to create markets, to be open to investment, to be open to innovation. What makes Chile very different from Argentina, Bolivia, or Peru has done really well, and why is so much investment in copper and lithium and clean energy? It's not that we have way more sun than Argentina. It's the fact that we have an open economy. We have a competitive economy. We have quite open regulations and standard regulations. And that's something I say again, maybe in this audience, you take it for granted, but it's not obvious at all. We don't even have any targets, any compulsory targets on renewable energy. But if you see that bouncing back, it's because we're open to investment. So when I think the role of government is thinking on, let's say, climate change, is that someone will have to bring in the bad news. I mean, the bad news means, as President Macron, is that at some point you'll have to carbon tax transport. And ask Macron when he tried to introduce that. He didn't do very well. Because it's easy, we have a carbon tax in Chile. It's 95% of the carbon tax is paid by the electricity sector. I think carbon tax is a perfect thing for taxing externalities. But if it's CO2 we're looking at, we need to look at the broad picture. And of course, taxing someone is hard to tax. It's politically difficult. So that's another perspective I see on the role of politics and government, is how to explain people that the energy transition and the climate change you were showing us, I mean, the speed and pace we need to introduce that means costs for society, which has to be taken over by the whole of society. And that's thing. And of course, to keep up, not with subsidies, because people ask me, why don't we subsidize electric mobility? Wait a minute, electric cars, particular per people, are usually for the people that are well off and can afford a car. So if you subsidize something, do it with public transport. You're efficient in CO2 emissions, you're efficient in air pollution. That's a role of government. So maybe the roles of government we see, and of course the risk sharing you mentioned. But I think one of the things we take for granted is the fact that governments play a big role, yes, but the role is to have rules of law, open markets, and that innovation can actually blossom. So that's what I think we tend to forget.
And maybe a question for Peter. Are universities educating the new professionals with the right knowledge and skills for a greener world?
That's a tough one. We were discussing with some people that are working with, especially with engineering departments. And we see that there's an effort, definitely, but I think we need to interconnect the entrepreneurship ecosystem with the academia, definitely. The academia right now, in Chile particularly, is too close. You have professors that have been around for 30, 40 years, and that naturally makes things more difficult. But in the last 5 years, I've seen an interest to incorporate, for example, the circular economy into the curriculum, and more technology, and the things that is happening, opening and connecting with universities all over the world. It's really beneficial for our ecosystem in Chile.
Another question from the audience for anyone who wants to jump in. How can Chile best leverage COP25, which is coming up pretty soon?
One of the reasons I should have been yesterday in Santiago, I'm on the council to the president on the COP25. So we've been going through that question. Chile, as as I said, is we can show an example of how open markets, innovation in private sector, plus academia, plus policy can bring together a perfect environment to really show that the energy transition is feasible, it's possible. But that also means, again, what I said, with the role of COP25 will be a big sunlight on Chile, on showing the way. And then again, that will mean that it won't be easy, and it won't be easy to do that transition. I mentioned the electricity sector, but Europe in COP24 just showed that Europe can become carbon neutral by taking the current share of 20% of electricity, going up to 65%, but that doesn't mean more energy. It actually means way less total energy. That means because electricity is so much more efficient. Take an electric car. It consumes a quarter of the energy than a combustion engine. But doing that and moving forward into that direction, electrifying society, means that you have to create incentives for diesel and transport. I showed the picture today that electricity is 30% of emissions. Transport is second. But electricity is going down this way. And transport is 98% based on fossil fuels. So that's COP25, an opportunity to show on that one. And the other opportunity I see is that Chile is very rich in mining and lithium, and you mentioned it. I mean, if our mining industry, which has the leading copper production in the world, can show that copper is necessary for the energy transition and for climate change economy, and we need to keep building on our copper industry, because sometimes you think this is a wonderful, beautiful, how do you say it, a rainbow world, but without copper, without lithium, without all these other minerals, we cannot have a climate change economy. And that's another opportunity for COP25 to really show Chile as a mining country, and that's hard to swallow for many people.
Dan or Mark, are there specific takeaways you had from your trip to Chile last week on how Massachusetts and Chile can collaborate?
Well, yeah, so I think, again, like I said, it was drinking from a fire hose, but I feel like I learned a lot about some of the opportunities and challenges in Chile. And I'd summarize those as, sort of transmission challenges, the ability to phase out fossil fuels while still increasing the amount of renewables that come on the market, which are obviously intermittent and need some way of firming up that capacity. And then, as you say, it's such an open market in Chile that, how do you move from a central generation consumer to one like we're starting to do here, which is more distributed generation market. And so moving from that central facility, transmission, distribution, use, to a much more integrated market. And what I would say is that, when I heard a lot of this, I observed the challenges in the market. What I sort of recalled is that we have exactly the same challenges in Massachusetts, California, Texas, and they have the same problems in Europe. They have the same problems in Asia. And so, we're sharing, the more we can share our challenges and learn from one another about how to adopt new technologies that can address these issues, I think the more efficient we're going to be about bringing more renewables into the market and addressing climate change. And I think what's great about Chile is you have some really large companies. You have Bernardo and Goldman there. You have international companies like Enel and Engie and AES. And so there's a lot of opportunity for these countries to address those challenges. So the more and more I heard the challenges, the more I heard, wow, there's a massive investment opportunity to bring new technologies into Chile to address the challenges. And what we saw is an incredible startup economy and a really good ecosystem to support those companies if those technologies come to Chile or if they're developed in Chile.
And it's a nice segue there, because we had the chance to spend the morning at Startup Chile, and shout out to Francesca. and incredibly well-organized morning where we met with 5 startups. And what was exciting was just their entrepreneurial spirit, and really it was quite similar. You know, it's really this, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs everywhere. They're trying to solve problems. They feel the urgency. You can feel the passion. And more of them are working on things that are sort of related to solving environmental and social impact problems, right? So the SEED program that they started, WEA, it's sort of directionally, addressing some of these things. And some of those companies had on their competitive landscape slides some of the Greentown member companies. And some of them were working on things that were really quite similar, fuel tank monitoring for the large trucks that are doing the mining and ways to improve that efficiency compared to the fuel tank monitoring that we do for one of our companies does for propane gas tanks in residential kind of neighborhoods. So many similarities. I think also the experience of having a chance to visit with Goldman and Thomas Keller and Bernardo at Sofofa, and obviously too with Claudio, and other associations, it's just the desire and commitment to work on innovation as well. I mean, if it's not set up already, there's efforts to set it up too. And I think the opportunities to continue to grow the entrepreneurial ecosystem are quite strong. Just the fact that Startup Chile is one of the top 10 accelerators in the world, has attracted 5,000 entrepreneurs, we were told, from 81 countries since it started about the same time that we did, is quite impressive. And I have to say, walking around and getting a tour, which I insisted on at the end of the visit, it was the most vibrant space, full and busy that I'd seen as I visit accelerators and incubators around the world. Oftentimes, many of these are they're set up, but they're not as full as they should be. But this was not the case in Chile, which kind of gave me, just excitement, enthusiasm that there's a lot to do there, and gives me the interest in really trying to share not just Line Vision that Dan mentioned, who's also a Greentown member company, but introduce many more startups here that can benefit from those markets, and then potentially host through a collaboration, a cohort of Chilean startups, possibly supported by the private sector or even the public sector, to encourage that cross country collaboration.
We have a few more minutes. We want to get one question from the audience, and then I have a few pouring in here. We'll see if we get to.
Okay, I'll be direct. When we started the current clean era investment, we had high oil prices, and we had governments actually supported the science behind climate change. Right now, we have exactly the opposite. We have low prices, and we have a government that doesn't really believe on climate change. So in that environment, the only way I can see we can do change is by having cost advantages that are so dramatic that actually overcome and establish new reality, like what Peter is trying to do with the pumps. So the question is to him, do you have, in your experience with this idea of circular economy, clear cost advantages that would allow you to compete with Chinese suppliers or with American suppliers or whatever your competitors?
Yeah, sure. First, I think the key advantage is Industry 4.0. And that's something I try to stress in my presentation. The fourth industrial revolution has democratized the access to these technologies. I put the picture there. We have right now the biggest 3D printer in Latin America. We've been 3D printing for 25 years. The first one we bought 25 years ago cost us $500,000, and it was like 50 centimeters per 50. And this one cost us $50,000. So the prices have declined. Sensors have decreased from 2004, 40%. Robotic arms have decreased 50%. So right now, there's no excuse to be a small to medium company, have a low volume production with high variability, and fight shoulder to shoulder to big companies that have a big volume with low customization. So I think that's a great advantage we have right now. And when you add the circular economy and you have a business model where you have resources that come from used or waste products. As I show there, you can reduce your energy consumption, you can reduce your waste generation, and you're not just giving the customer a cheaper product or higher quality product, but you're creating a new business relationship. And these guys, they are not just looking for cheap products, they are looking for value creation, because they have directors that are looking for that also. So that's why a company right now is not just a manufacturing or engineering firm. It's a content creator company, it's a marketing company, it's a storyteller company, it's everything. So that's an entrepreneurial mindset that everybody should have right now. But as I said before, we are fighting shoulder to shoulder with huge companies. We became the manufacturer of the year last year in the UK. And it's a great opportunity for everybody if you mix Industry 4.0 and circular economy.
Thank you.
So we have a lightning round, 30-second answers each. It's one question broken into something for each of you by one person. So Daniel, how can Chileans have access to your fund? Claudio, how can smaller companies be part of the mentioned changes? And Mark, is there any program we can be part of to adopt technology to the Chilean ecosystem, and how can we be part of the solution?
Okay,
Dan?
me first. Yeah, so we are still raising a little bit more money, but I can't make any general solicitations or my lawyers will crucify me. So, but there is opportunities to be part of the fund. I think the other way Chileans can be part of the fund is for our companies to collaborate with customers and users in Chile. So Line Vision is one example, but carbon fiber, composite materials, Spark Meter, which makes a smart metering technology, solar wafer technologies, and of course we are going to be in the storage business as well. So lithium is going to be a critical part of our portfolio, I expect, in the future.
Claudio?
Just briefly, again, thank for this opportunity to share our thoughts. My presentation is online on our website, generadora.cl, in case any of you wanted to review some of the data I went through too quickly. And also the ones that are interested, more insights. We're an association of the generators, the operators of the system. So in electricity, nothing is usually very small. The smallest company in our members is 100 megawatts, which is actually operating the tower I showed at the end, called Cerro Dominador, which is the first concentrated solar power plant in Latin America. And so, but there is an ecosystem in Chile, very big ecosystem of other associations, organizations that are specifically in technology. And you can, even our website, you can find many of those related to distributed solar power. Asesol has a big meeting next week in Chile. Then it's Acera, which is mostly largest solar power and wind. Then there is APEMEX, smaller hydro. Then there is some with ESCOs with energy efficiency. So there is an ecosystem in Chile where you can look more at the specific mode technology. And of course, anyone can look through our website, and more than welcome to have more of a discussion.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
And I guess if you're a Chilean startup, we run accelerator programs and currently have 2 open challenges, calls for applications. One that's hydrogen focused that we're running with Shell and Toyota. The other one with Saint-Gobain, a leading construction materials company that's around a disruption around the built environment. So those application deadlines are coming up quite soon. If you're a Chilean corporate, then we'd love to talk to you as well. I mean, I think there's really interesting opportunities for collaboration where to support the innovation activity and infrastructure either that you're building or you want to continue to improve and manage it, and then to do that through collaboration that and frankly peer sharing of what's been working here, which I think could have a potentially strong impact as well.
And all the panelists will be around for the rest of the afternoon in the cocktail hours, and ChileMass can connect any of you with any of us if you have specific questions. But I wanted to thank all the panelists for being here today and sharing your insights, and thank you all for all the good questions and the participation.